I'm going to be like turning around in circles so that I can make eye contact with everyone. So my name is Jessica, and I have been working with WPS for a couple of years now, since right before COVID. So we've been through a lot of adventures together. And yes, as Sarah said, the work that we've done with the WPS archives has been really expansive. So just to kind of address that a little bit, together we drafted the collecting policy, the donor agreements, the loan forms, and a number of finding aids and other documentation so that we can work towards a place where WPS is able to not just be the stewards of their collections, but also to share and provide more research access. I think that there is just a ton of wonderful research that could be done on the East Bay and on Warren specifically within the East Bay. And so it's really been a kind of step-by-step process of building the archival infrastructure so that we are in a place where we can share those resources with researchers. I couldn't do this without Sarah, of course, and Lori and Kristen, who have just done amazing, amazing work. To date, Lori and Kristen have cataloged to the just about the item or file level 3 full collections within WPS. So we're talking thousands of items. So hundreds in each collection. Yeah. I know. That's the kind of documentation part that makes me really excited, but is maybe less exciting to other folks. But it's really, really wonderful, painstaking work that we've been doing for quite some time. And this particular exhibit is the exhibit that we put together last year based on the artist Henry Newell Cady. This particular project focuses obviously on the life and works of Henry Newell Cady. But in talking about Cady, we ended up also researching, finding out a lot, and discussing a lot about his wife as well, Annie Cole Cady, who was also a very important figure in town in terms of arts and letters. She was a well-published author of children's works and some other maybe YA style. We'll talk about that in a second. The kind of star of the illustrations is this work by Annie Cole, The American Continent and Its Inhabitants Before Columbus. Also the story of its invasion by Spain, France, and England. Exactly! That is exactly what I said when I read it, like, oh wow. So, just like that. So it's very, very fascinating. This is definitely the most significant of Annie Cole Cady's works. It is by far the most significant of Henry Newell Cady's illustrations. This is a massive book that was published in multiple volumes and also serialized into 30 editions, and the George Hale Library has all 30 serialized editions. Yeah, really beautiful. There's actually a separate heading for the serialized version so that you can see what the covers looked like. These images are from the hardbound version of the book. And I hope this is going to get us to be more interested in looking at the site so you can see more clearly. It's a little blurry here. This is an opening illustration that is really fantastic. It is like the history of North America from the Ice Age all the way through indigenous peoples. So it's really something, right? And then the book is a very interesting book. Annie Cole Cady is writing this in the late 1890s. It's published right at the turn of the century, late 1890s. And so if you're thinking about the perspectives at that time, on the American continent, this title is wild, is really something, right? Oh yeah, the focus is even something, that she would be talking about the history of the Americas pre-Columbus, and then that really scathing subheading, it's really something. And also the story of its invasion by Spain, France, and England. So the book,
The Dutch must be pissed off.
yes, would have been right. And so the Spanish-American War is 1898. It's going to correspond almost exactly with when this book was published. And then there's, if you think about like the Spanish Claims Treaty, like there's really a lot of conversation right at the turn of century that's happening. Sometimes I think when we talk about the Spanish-American War, it gives this impression that it happened somewhere further away, and it really all took place in Cuba. So it's like really right at our door, yeah. And there's a lot of East Bay connection to what is happening in the Spanish-American War. So really, the book is fascinating. There's a ton of illustrations. So we only have a small sampling here, and I would really encourage folks to check them out. By far, Cady's most ambitious artistic work. I would say, yeah. I got the approval of Sarah Weed.
Was the book as radical as the title makes it sound?
You're previewing my next sentence. Well, yes, my answer to that is yes and no, right? I think there's an attempt. I do think that there is an attempt, and I think that it was radical at the time, right? But I think if we look at it now, there are things that we're like, right?
Yeah.
So it was very interesting to think about how to describe this work in a way to both give Annie Cole a little bit of credit, right? But also to say, well, it's not perfect, right? She did a ton of research, did Annie Cole, for this book. She, in fact, corresponded with the Royal Library in Spain in Madrid, in order to get information and to get some kinds of images or descriptions that Cady could use to create his illustrations. And he also, in some of them, and actually it's very interesting, Linda, because in the caption it'll say, this is an artist's imagining from a description, to say that it's not exactly. But when you see Cady's images of different indigenous peoples, and the book is massive, it covers indigenous peoples across the whole of the United States, Central America, and South America. Oh yeah, it's clear that a massive amount of research went into it. We know she corresponded with the Royal Library of Spain. It's also why we think she did some of the research at the Philadelphia Library, because at that time that would have been a really massive, the holdings would have been really significant for her work. Something else that's really interesting about Cady's illustrations in the book are that he is depicting indigenous people living their lives. It's not warring or violent, there's none of that. It is people in communities. And so while the images are not perfect, they are far from the very stereotypical art and images that were predominantly being made in this country at the time. And there's some places, some of the images are, I would say that the real crux of the book is celebrating the culture and achievement of indigenous peoples prior to Columbus. It is very much, each section is about a different indigenous group, and it talks about their culture. It talks about temples, things that are built. It talks about built works. It talks about marketplaces. It talks about cultural traditions. Not that aspect of it is, let's say, less fetishizing. There are aspects that I would say are more fetishizing. And so you can see here, these are just some of the examples of Cady's work. and again, at the time, even just paintings of indigenous folks just like having a conversation would have been very revolutionary when we were used to seeing, again, very fetishized, often violent, kind of, yeah, exactly. And everything about this book is about dispelling that idea, that even that word is completely about dispelling that, right? Except one part.
Oh, that's the yes and no thing.
And so if you go to the site as well, you can see a little bit of the text around for some of these insert drawings. And you can see here's Cady's signature. And so some of these, he is recreating cities in South and Central America from descriptions that they've received from the Royal Library in Spain, but they don't really know what it looks like. So there'll be sometimes little notes that say that this is an artist's rendering. But there is an attempt to be faithful, right? Here's the Great Market. Really nice. Even the images themselves, you can see, are in a little bit of a different style, depending. Ancient Peru.
Did he ever travel there?
Mm-mm. No, all done on research, and I really do think that what they received from overseas was probably pretty valuable compared to what we would have had
Must have been
at the
letters,
time.
correspondence.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm. If you find them in an attic, I'd love to see them.
I don't go there.
Mhm. Now,
Jessica, how long do you think it took them to write this? It must have taken years.
you know,
With all
that's
the
actually a really interesting thing. I would think it would take years, also because of the correspondence, having to go back and forth.
Don't say something.
But I think it's something she worked on faithfully the entire time that they were away from Warren. And then she has it published when they get back. So it would have, I mean, close to 10 years.
Oh, okay, all right.
Still, the entire continent of the US is.
It's
And even
massive.
South America.
Oh, yeah. It's really something. It's really something. And then as serialized, as I said, is 30 like little journal style, like magazine style serials. So it's a very expansive text, as I said. It was begun when they were in Germantown. So the 1880s to 1890s, Kristen, and then she publishes it like right at the turn of the century.
Okay.
So maybe even a little more than a decade. It's likely she utilized the public libraries of Philadelphia for her extensive study. According to Warren historian and Cady family acquaintance Lydia Rogers, Annie Cole Cady corresponded with the Royal Library in Spain. The work covers the evolution of various territories throughout North, Central, and South America with a focus on the land and its people, and in particular their culture and advancements. So that focus is like unheard of at that time. The book appeared in 3 formats: one massive book, a 2-volume work, and the serialized edition of 30. Now, here's to get to your question, Linda. Everything that I've said so far is like, we get so excited. You know, I was so excited in looking at it. And then there's this one detail where I thought, oh, why did you do that? So the book is written in a really unique way. If you look at the cover of the book, it says that the author is Robin Goodfellow, F.H. So it's where you would expect to see the author's name. It says, a unique history communicated by Robin Goodfellow, F.H., and merely written by Annie Cole Cady. Robin Goodfellow is another name for Puck. And F.H. is fairy historian. Yeah, exactly. There you go. That was my response also. So, yes, exactly. So the book is the structure of the book is Robin Goodfellow is taking a group of children on a jaunt through history, and each chapter they're kind of arriving in a different place in the Americas and a different place in time, and then Robin Goodfellow is like telling the story of these indigenous people. So that was the point where I was like, ooh, it kind of gave this sort of fantasy element to the history, right? It was like she got right up close to the edge, and then this kind of pulls it back a little bit. And again, I will also say, starting the book with a history that goes from the Ice Age, dinosaurs, indigenous people, is also a little problematic, right? It's like makes it look like indigenous folks are like right next to the dinosaurs, but it also makes it look like it's extinct as well, right? And so it's a little bit, I think, of her style as, look, I think it was difficult for her to be taken seriously as an author. It was much easier for women to be taken seriously as children's authors or YA authors. So this book that is clearly a decade of work and research gets framed in this kind of fantasy light. It's one of those things where if it had just been written straight, I think it would have been, we would be having a different conversation about it right now, right?
Yeah.
And the subtitle is very bold, very bold. The story of its invasion by Spain, France, and England. As I say in the record, while this word choice and focus may appear very progressive and were during her time, there is still a little bit of bias in there and a little bit of fetishization and othering of Native Americans by couching it in this kind of fantasy sort of realm, right? The style is reminiscent of a fairy tale, and Annie frames the text as a unique history communicated by Robin Goodfellow. As I said, in English folklore, Robin Goodfellow is another name for Puck, who is a mischievous character who's often accused of telling tall tales. So that's also like a sort of another layer that almost undercuts the wealth of research that she did in some aspects, right? And part of that, who knows, right? She could have had a children's book publisher at the time that said frame this as a children's book. I think there is an attempt to be more progressive, but obviously she's affected by the biases of her times as well. I mean, we would be remiss not to know
Just
that.
was there any, she may have been couching it that way, but whether what she was reporting was actually accurate?
It actually, the book is, in the reviews that I read, is for its time strikingly accurate.
Okay.
So that really, that's why I say, oh, you did all of this research and you did all of this work, and then it kind of almost, she undercut herself a little
So
bit.
it's almost a way of protecting herself, or
It is a way of indemnifying, and you know, that's actually a good point too, Linda, is that they might not have known whether the research that they were able to get would be 100% correct.
Yeah.
So she frames it in this way to indemnify herself from any falsehoods, but I don't know, it was a lot of research.
Yeah, Jessica, you said she was the primary breadwinner.
Yeah,
If you're the primary breadwinner, you need to make
that money.
Yeah. And if you think back through the 19th century, this is late on the verge of the 20th.
Oh, yeah.
So many women, so many outstanding women writers
Oh.
hiding their work.
Absolutely.
People would come into the house, and Emily Dickinson and Austen,
Oh.
under the blotter, they would never share the
Oh,
work.
yeah, I mean,
This is 50, 60 years later.
what is, Jane Eyre was published under something Bell, Curie Bell, so in a non-gendered name at first, right? So the fact that she's even attempting a project is a big deal. And when you see the book, it is very different in look and feel than her other works, right? You know, there's the history of New England in one-syllable words. This is not that, you know? But at the same time, it's not perfect. Do I think that she spoke to any Native American people? No. You know, so there's that.
It's you.
So I think that this conversation is a really worthwhile one. I think it's a nice place to stop because I think it gets us really thinking about a lot, and hopefully will get us maybe more interested in checking out the site, right? And I really just have to say thank you to Rich, to WPS for sure, and to George Hale for their support in this project. And hopefully this gives you a sense, and you'll come back in September to see our next digital exhibit.